Okay, ready?
Start now.
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are here to talk about Foo Fighters, a band that is almost universally loved for songs like My Hero, Learn to Fly, and Everlong. These are songs that speak to just about everybody because when you listen to them, they just make you feel good. But for as uplifting as many of their songs may be, the band's actual history has been defined by tragic, sudden, heartbreaking loss. From their formation in the wake of the death of Kurt Cobain, to most recently losing their drummer Taylor Hawkins. And what's really interesting is that Foo Fighters were never supposed to be a real band. It was never intended to be anything other than an outlet for some ideas that Dave Grohl had after the tragic loss that broke up Nirvana. And yet, in spite of that, or maybe because of it, Foo Fighters have become one of the most iconic bands of the last 30 years, achieving that incredibly rare combination of both commercial success and critical appeal. And the question is, how do they do it? And what is their lasting impact and influence? Those are the questions that I will try to answer in this video. And also, let's talk about nuts and snacks. Cashews, almonds, pecans, pistachios, jelly beans, jawbreakers, root beer barrels. The variety is vast at nuts.com. Nuts.com is your one-stop shop for freshly roasted nuts, dried fruit, sweets, pantry staples like specialty flours, and more. And Nuts.com offers plenty of gluten-free options, organic choices, and other diet-friendly products. And at Nuts.com, quality is top priority. They roast their nuts and pop their corn the same day that it ships, so they reach you deliciously fresh, and satisfaction is guaranteed. They sent me their snack sampler with some pretzels and popcorn and some trail mix. What really stood out to me was just how fresh everything was. And right now, Nuts.com is offering new customers a free gift with purchase and free shipping on orders of $29 or more at nuts.com/rock. So go check out all the delicious options at nuts.com/rock. You'll receive a free gift and free shipping when you spend $29 or more. That's nuts.com/rock. Foo Fighters' first album came out in 1995, but their origins go back much further than that. Dave Grohl joined Nirvana in 1990 after playing with the Washington, D.C.-based hardcore punk band Scream. And while on the road with Nirvana, he wrote his own songs to fill the downtime. But because he was somewhat intimidated by Kurt Cobain's incredible songwriting, he initially didn't share many of these songs with the rest of the band. Instead, he just booked some studio time and put out an entire solo album under the name Late, including a few songs that would end up being used as Foo Fighters tracks years later, such as Winnebago. And this album is definitely rough around the edges, but even then, you can still hear that signature sound. And with Nirvana blowing up and becoming more than just a band, like honestly, they were one of the most important cultural forces on the planet that was bigger than just music, he didn't really have any plans or ambitions for this project, and he just stayed focused on Nirvana as they continued to take over the world. They seemed absolutely unstoppable until April 8th, 1994, when Kurt Cobain's body was found at his house in Seattle after he had taken his own life, which brought Nirvana to an abrupt, heartbreaking end. And with Nirvana suddenly over and the tragic death of one of his best friends, Dave wasn't sure what to do. He did have some offers to join some great bands as a drummer, including Danzig and Tom Petty, but as he said, quote, "I just couldn't imagine doing that because it would just remind me of being in Nirvana. Every time I sat down at a drum set, I would think of that. Do I even play music anymore? I don't know. Maybe that was it. Maybe it's time to do something else. Maybe real life starts now." But ultimately, he decided to do what he had always done. The one thing that he, as a high school dropout, knew how to do, which was to make music. But he was very aware that anything he would do would understandably be linked to and compared to Nirvana. And he wasn't trying to ride the coattails of his former band. He just wanted to record this stuff to get it off his chest. As he put it, the first Foo Fighters record was not meant to be an album. It was an experiment and for fun. I was just fucking around. Some of the lyrics weren't even real words. And so he booked studio time at Robert Lang's studio in Shoreline, Washington, and recorded what would be the first Foo Fighters album in just 6 days. And what's really interesting to me is just how unsure he was of the whole thing. As he said, "I was insecure about my voice. You know how people double their vocals to make them stronger? That album, the vocals are quadrupled. I didn't want to be a lead singer. I couldn't fucking sing." And as for the name Foo Fighters, which was a World War II era term for what we now call UFOs, that was really just so people would think of it as a real band rather than a solo project, because he was kind of embarrassed about that aspect. As he later said, "Had I actually considered this to be a career, I probably would have called it something else, because it's the stupidest fucking band name in the world." And after those recordings he did with Robert Lang started to circulate around the industry, he quickly got major label interest and signed to Capitol Records. The other interesting aspect to me, as someone who obviously grew up in the punk and hardcore scene, is that in many ways this was sort of a return to Dave's roots in the 80s hardcore scene. As he said, "When I was a kid, I learned how to play drums from listening to my favorite band's albums, Bad Brains, Minor Threat, and stuff like that. And with Foo Fighters getting all this interest and starting to turn into a real project, he needed a band. And coming out of Nirvana, one of literally the most important bands of all time, he could have gotten pretty much anybody to play with him, I'm sure, but he chose people from the punk scene. Nate Mendel and William Goldsmith of the legendary 90s emo band Sunny Day Real Estate, and Pat Smear, who had played with Nirvana, but of course also the absolutely iconic 80s punk band The Germs. And once again, when he talks about asking Pat to join the band, you can really see how Dave just didn't have any sort of big aspirations for Foo Fighters. That guy was in The Germs. He was great in Nirvana, and I thought he's way out of this league. This is just a stupid demo. And again, being that this had two members of Nirvana, they could have instantly come out of the gate playing huge shows, I'm sure. But instead, if you look at where they actually played those initial first shows, they were at tiny venues like the Velvet Elvis in Seattle, which is the same place that just a year or two before that, I saw DIY hardcore bands like The Locust and Man is the Bastard. And so you kind of put all that together, and I think of it as Foo Fighters could have jumped the line, but they didn't. For the most part, they really operated like a tiny band that nobody knew or cared about. It's not exactly a recipe for success, and yet despite all of that, the absolute greatness of those songs couldn't be denied. And the album ended up selling over 2 million copies in just 5 months. And with that, Dave Grohl started to change his mind. After that first Foo Fighters record, we thought, okay, well, let's make one more. The ball kind of just kept rolling, and it was a nice way to feel like life had direction and that there were things to look forward to, because I didn't want to get stuck in that place where I was when Nirvana ended. And before I go on, if you like this video, please hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel and it makes sure that you don't miss any of my videos. And with that, they got to work on their second album, The Color and the Shape, this time taking a little bit more of a collaborative approach to the material, with Dave sort of writing the core songs, but the rest of the band having input on the song's overall arrangement.
There's a song about a movie, there's a song about the relationship between the journalist and the musician, there's songs about heroes that I had when I was a kid, and I think it's sort of everyone sort of tagged it as this heavy emotional trip. Man.
But that didn't last long. After hearing the first mix of the album, Dave wasn't happy with the drum tracks and re-recorded almost all of William Goldsmith's original performances. William was honestly, understandably not happy about that, and shortly after quit the band. And it sounds like there was a little bit more to it than just that, like maybe they weren't really getting along with him in general, but still, that was probably a bit of a dick move on Dave's part, and he later said that, quote, "I wish that I would have handled things differently." But it was also a blessing in disguise, because that is what led to them recruiting Taylor Hawkins as his replacement, who would of course go on to be an absolutely vital part of the band. And lyrically, the album dealt heavily with Dave's divorce from his first wife, and although they emerged from this whole process with what I would consider to be one of the best rock albums of the decade, it wasn't easy. As Nate Mendel said, "While recording this record, 2 marriages fell apart, we lost a drummer, someone nearly went to jail, and we discovered late in the day that record making is hellishly expensive and best done with a budget prepared beforehand." But despite the rocky road that it took for them to get there, the album was both a critical and a commercial success, and it established the Foo Fighters as more than just the guy from Nirvana's new band. They were most definitely their own thing, and they were great. But their struggles weren't over. Pat Smear left the band shortly after the album came out, saying that he was simply exhausted and wasn't up for more touring, which brought the band to the brink. As Dave Grohl put it, quote, "The band was just holding on by our fingertips this whole time." And Pat announced on stage that his replacement would be Franz Stahl, who Dave had previously played with in Scream. Yet another example of Dave going back to the well of 80s hardcore. But that was short-lived as well. The band got to work on what would be their third album, There's Nothing Left to Lose, but it was immediately obvious that things weren't working out with Franz. So in spite of the fact that he was a close friend of Dave's, he was fired and replaced with Chris Shiflett of No Use for a Name and Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. Once again, the Foo Fighters going back to their roots in punk. And they emerged from all of that with an album that was a little bit more accessible and pop-friendly than anything they'd done before, which prompted some people to, of course, call them sellouts. But at the end of the day, I think it's a great album and includes some of their absolute best songs, like Learn to Fly. And at this point, despite all the setbacks, the band was on top of the world, winning their first of many Grammys in 2001, but all that success was getting to them. First, Taylor Hawkins nearly died of an overdose while on a trip to London, foreshadowing the unfortunate future. As he put it, a lot of my insecurities, which led to my drug use, had to do with me not feeling like I was good enough to be in this band, to play drums with Dave. And it was never anything that Dave ever said. He could have fucking given up on me a long time ago, but he believed in me so I could get out of that hole. And their next album, One by One, was somewhat of a disaster. First, they went into the studio and spent nearly $1 million recording most of the album, only to scrap almost all of that work. And disheartened by all of that, they took a little bit of a break. Dave played with Queens of the Stone Age for a while, and many people wondered if maybe the band was done. But as the Foo Fighters always had before, they pulled it together, got back in the studio, and eventually cranked out the album. And commercially, it was their strongest debut yet, coming out at number 3 on Billboard, with All My Life as the lead single, which personally I think is one of their best songs. But in hindsight, the band felt like this album just wasn't their best work. As Dave later said, I was kind of pissed at myself for the last record. 4 of the songs were good, and the other 7 I never played again in my life. We rushed into it and we rushed out of it. In not wanting to repeat that same mistake, they took their time with their next release, the double album In Your Honor. One of the 2 albums was all acoustic songs that were originally intended for a Dave Grohl solo album, and the other was a traditional Foo Fighters rock album with Best of You as the lead single. Is someone getting the best of you? And with that, Foo Fighters seemed to finally be unstoppable. They had a stable core lineup, they had things figured out creatively, and their personal lives also seemed like they were in a good place. And they were on a roll. Their next 5 albums all debuted in the top 3 on Billboard. They were nominated for 5 more Grammys, except for the one that they lost to Adele. And they seemed to be one of the very, very few bands that achieved both massive commercial success and almost universal critical acclaim. And I think a big part of that is what I mentioned earlier. Dave Grohl's commitment to his punk roots that never went away even as they became a giant band. For example, his doom metal kind of side project called Probot, which featured Kronos from Venom, Wino from St. Vitus, and Lemmy from Motorhead, and came out on the highly acclaimed indie label Southern Lord. And his thrash metal project called Dream Widow from the movie Studio 666. They seemed like they had it all until March 25th, 2022, when the news broke that Taylor Hawkins had died before their show in Bogota, Colombia.
This was the last known time he took to the stage, March 20th in Argentina. Taylor Hawkins was 50 years old and the father of 3 kids.
And the world was shocked by this because for whatever issues Taylor obviously had behind the scenes, he seemed like the happiest guy in the world. And without him, the band's future was up in the air. Because Taylor wasn't just the guy that sat behind the drum set, he was really the co-star of Foo Fighters. He was just incredibly charismatic and high energy, one of the rare people who could command that kind of attention even from behind a drum set.
Stylistically, Queen changed more often than most of you people have changed management. Crickets. Oh, shit.
And so his death came just as a complete surprise to me and I think pretty much everyone else. But as I think we all know by now, appearances can be deceiving. The news came out shortly after that after analysis, he had 10 substances in his system, including opioids and benzodiazepines. And so apparently the same demons that almost took him in 2001 had unfortunately finally won the battle. The band announced 2 tribute shows in memory of Taylor, including everybody from Chris Rock, Lars Ulrich, Travis Barker, and Joan Jett to Jack Black and Miley Cyrus. But the biggest moment by far is when his teenage son Oliver joined to play My Hero with the band, which I can really only describe as one of the most heartbreaking musical moments that I have ever witnessed. And with their future uncertain, the band stayed quiet for quite a few months until making a statement that heavily implied that they would be back, saying, quote, "We also know that you, the fans, meant as much to Taylor as he meant to you. And we know that when we see you again, and we will soon, he'll be there in spirit with all of us every night." And so they announced that their new drummer would be Josh Freese of the Vandals, yet another 80s punk icon joining the Foo Fighters. And they released their latest album, But Here We Are, in 2022, which dealt with the loss of both Taylor and Dave Grohl's mother. Which brings us to the last question. What is the legacy of Foo Fighters? And to that, it's actually kind of hard to say, because even after so much tragedy, the band shows absolutely no sign of stopping or even slowing down. They formed in the wake of Dave Grohl losing one close friend and musical collaborator, and they're still here after it happened to him again. But regardless of where they go from here, I think it's safe to say this much. In my opinion, they're one of the absolute greatest bands of our generation, and their success in particular, I think, really speaks to how exceptional Dave Grohl is. He is one of a handful of people who can really, truly do it all. He's a great player, a super charismatic performer who can carry the show and is great in front of the camera and in the press, and an absolutely incredible songwriter with decades of iconic songs in his catalog. And most of all, he seems incredibly humble given what he has achieved. I think this quote from Dave really sums it all up. "I was in this band that people considered so important, and people thought it really made a difference, and it touched so many people's lives and changed the direction of popular culture." Now, that's not necessarily how I look at it, but a lot of people think about it that way. And it doesn't make sense to imagine that happening twice in your life. And yet it did, and I think that really says it all. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments, and I would like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my videos and podcasts early. There are members-only channels in my Discord that I'm super active in. I do giveaways sometimes, and there's also a way to have me review your music. So if any of that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of the video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.